Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching News Night on DD India, your prime time destination for news and bespoke analysis. It's good to see you again. All right, on the show tonight, we take a deep dive into India-Russia relations. Now, Sergei Lavrov concluded his visit to India this afternoon. He held talks with India's Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar. We'll have two guests over for a discussion on the past, present, and future trajectory of India-Russia ties. Also on the show, New Delhi hosts U.S. Special Envoy for Climate John Kerry for talks ahead of a climate summit called by U.S. President Joe Biden on 22nd and 23rd April. And we get you the latest from Vienna, where the U.S. and Iran held indirect talks to salvage the 2015 nuclear deal. Plus, news and updates from India and the world. All that and much more coming up over the next 1 hour. But first, as always, the headlines. External Affairs Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar holds talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in New Delhi, reviews cooperation in defense, space and nuclear energy in preparation for the annual summit between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Vladimir Putin. Afghanistan and Iran figure in the talks. New Delhi shares its viewpoint on the Indo-Pacific. On the 41st foundation day of the BJP, Prime Minister Narendra Modi urges party workers to counter false narratives being spread by other political parties. Prime Minister Modi campaigns in West Bengal, says Mamata Banerjee's call to all Muslims to unite against attempts at dividing their vote is an expression of defeat. At a rally in Chanditola, Mamata Banerjee urges Muslim voters not to waste their vote on the AIMIM, calls on them to vote for her party, the TMC. Polling in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Puducherry and Assam concludes women, youth and the elderly take part enthusiastically. About 80% voting seen in the third phase of polls in West Bengal. The BJP trains its guns on the TMC after VVPAT and EVMs are found at party leader Gautam Ghosh's house in Uluberia, asks Election Commission to take action. Union Health Minister holds review meeting with health ministers of 11 states most affected by COVID-19. Delhi government announces night curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. till 30th April. E-pass mandatory for essential services as well as 24/7 vaccinations. Visiting U.S. Special Envoy for Climate John Kerry holds talks with Environment Minister Prakash Javadekar, discusses issues such as climate finance, joint research and collaboration. Kerry praises PM Modi's global leadership in the renewable energy sector. Iran and the United States hold indirect talks in Vienna in a bid to both countries back into full compliance with the 2015 nuclear deal that Washington abandoned 3 years ago. Officials from the UK, France, Russia, China and Germany act as intermediaries. Iran says no to negotiations with the US but expresses willingness to return to talks. Israel President asked Benjamin Netanyahu to try to form a new government after 52 lawmakers elected to Israel's parliament backed Netanyahu. Recent elections in Israel had given a hung verdict. And the 25-day-long ceremonial Dandi March organized as part of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav concludes. Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu addresses the closing ceremony, emphasizes the need for maintaining decency of language in public discourse, calls the Dandi Salt March a watershed moment that altered the course of Indian history. Right, our cover story tonight is on India-Russia relations. Now, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov held talks with India's Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar this afternoon in New Delhi. Now, they reviewed the entire status of cooperation on a number of issues, including defense, space and nuclear energy. Lavrov's visit prepared the ground for President Vladimir Putin's visit to India for the annual India-Russia summit.
The strides, namaste and the elbow bump that set the tone for the India-Russia foreign ministers' meeting, signifying a new era of cooperation amidst a global pandemic. The bonhomie was evident even as External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov got down to hard diplomacy.
Though the world has changed in the last 7 decades and there have been different governments at both ends, we are both cognizant of the multipolar and rebalanced nature of international relations today. We both understand the importance of our relationship to global peace, security and stability.
These ties are valuable, mutually respectful, and they are not subjected to political fluctuations. We noted with satisfaction that despite the pandemic, we were able to preserve the dynamic bilateral political dialogue. We agreed to joint efforts to overcome the declining mutual trade caused by the pandemic.
Even as Lavrov carried President Vladimir Putin's message for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the two leaders laid the groundwork for the upcoming visit of President Putin to India for the India-Russia annual summit. The two sides discussed cooperation across a range of sectors, from cooperation in the fields of nuclear and defense, Russian support on Gaganyaan, to discussions on the manufacturing of Russia's Sputnik V vaccine in India. Multifaceted areas of mutual interest were taken up.
We talked about long-standing partnership in nuclear, space and defense sectors. We assessed positively our economic cooperation, noting the new opportunities in Russian Far East. We spoke of connectivity, including the International North-South Transport Corridor and the Chennai-Vladivostok Eastern Maritime Corridor. Our rapidly expanding energy cooperation that now includes long-term commitments was also on the agenda.
We hope to launch as soon as possible talks on the free trade area between India and Eurasian Economic Union based on mutual benefit. We discussed bilateral military cooperation, including state-of-the-art weapons manufacturing. I'm sure that the deepening of the Russian-Indian military cooperation serves national interests of both countries.
Not just bilateral issues, but emerging regional dynamics were also discussed in a free and frank atmosphere. The two sides shared their perspectives on the political settlement in Afghanistan, as well as securing the Indo-Pacific.
For India, what happens in Afghanistan impacts its security directly. I shared our approach that a durable peace there would require harmonizing interests of all, both within and around that country. The peace process must be based on foundational principles to which we all subscribe, and a political solution should mean an independent, sovereign, united and democratic Afghanistan. I shared our viewpoint on the Indo-Pacific, as our Prime Minister pointed out at the Shangri-La dialogue some years ago. Contemporary challenges require countries to work together in new and different ways. Such cooperation also reflects the multipolar and rebalanced character of global politics.
The exchange of views on thorny issues of today shows proximity or similarity of our stances. We discussed such issues as peaceful settlement in Afghanistan, Syrian crisis, situation around Iran's nuclear program, situation in Myanmar. We also discussed the situation in the Eurasian continent and in Asia-Pacific in general.
UNSC reforms, G20, ASEAN, situation in Myanmar, the Iran nuclear deal, and a need for increased vaccine cooperation also figured prominently in the talks between S. Jaishankar and Sergei Lavrov. In the words of Dr. S. Jaishankar,
despite the COVID pandemic, I'm very glad to see we've actually sustained our contacts in this period. Prime Minister Modi and President Putin have held 4 telephonic conversations last year.
Despite the pandemic and its global fallout, the Russian foreign minister's India visit is a clear indication of the strength of India-Russia ties. Tapas Bhattacharya and Amritpal Singh's report for DD India.
Right, time now for our In Focus segment, in which we are discussing about defense and trade, top India-Russia talks. And joining me are two very special guests, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal and Ambassador Vivek Karju. Now, the two need no introduction, but just for the benefit of viewers tuning in from around the world, Ambassador Sibal is a former Indian Foreign Secretary, is also a former Indian envoy to Turkey, Egypt, France and Russia. And Ambassador Karju is a former Indian ambassador to Afghanistan, Myanmar and Thailand, and at one time headed the Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran desk in the Indian Foreign Ministry. Gentlemen, welcome to News Night. If I can start with you, Ambassador Sibal, how would you describe the India-Russia ties today as they stand, and what did you make of the outcomes from the Lavrov-Jaishankar talks held this afternoon in New Delhi?
I think the talks have gone very well. They were very comprehensive. We have already spelled out in great detail the subjects that were discussed. So it was necessary to have this dialogue, because in the meantime, as all know, our relations with the United States have expanded a great deal, especially in the Indo-Pacific area, and we have problems with China. And Russia has become very close to China for a variety of reasons. And they have some reservations about the Indo-Pacific and are growing ties with the United States that naturally affect the defense ties between India and Russia. We missed out on the annual summit between the two leaders, which have been held in an unbroken manner since the year 2000. It's a pity that even a virtual summit could not be held in 2020, but we can make up for this and have a substantial dialogue this year. The trade is one of the weaknesses in our relationship because the last figures before the pandemic struck were about $10 billion, which is very little. However, we should also keep in mind that while trade is important, there are other areas of our relationship which are very vital to us in terms of our overall security. Defense being obviously very important, space very much so, but also the transfer of some very important and advanced technologies that Russia has always been liberal with regard to India, and of course the nuclear part, where the only country that is building nuclear power plants in India is Russia. So in terms of our overall balance of foreign policy, even as Minister Jaishankar rightly said, that we have to develop new relationships and rebalance them because of the changed nature of the international situation. Our relations with Russia, which are time-tested, are very important, and we should not allow any serious dilution of this relationship, no matter what the external factors, because when the crunch time comes, then we need a very reliable, time-tested partner. Even now, Jaishankar had said that during our standoff, he didn't mention that our request for defense material from Russia were met. And this despite the fact that Russia and China now have very close strategic relationship. And I'm glad that Lavrov said that we accept India's need for diversification of its defense ties. So there is a realism in that regard. On Indo-Pacific, which is now becoming an important element of our foreign policy in this part of the region, we need to talk to Russia more and try and eliminate the reservations, if we can, that they have about this. Even today, Lavrov didn't mention Indo-Pacific. He mentioned Asia-Pacific because they don't like the concept of Indo-Pacific. So there are some differences. On Afghanistan, clearly, we are not on the same wicket, though we try to show that we are, because it came out also in the joint press conference where Lavrov spoke in favor of the Taliban as a political force which has to be recognized, and there has to be a religious balance. The point is, this religious balance is a problem for us, because this religious balance will include a lot of fundamentalist kind of theocratic ideology that the Taliban has. And coupled with Pakistan, it's a threat to us. But Russia has its own interests and its own long-term view, and we therefore have to continue talking to see how we can narrow differences. On the whole, I'm very happy with the content of this visit, and I'm glad that it took place.
Fair point. Ambassador Kaju, Ambassador Sibal covered a lot of ground there in his opening remarks or intervention. Now, predictably, both sides discussed nuclear issues, energy issues, defense and security, space cooperation, but also Afghanistan, West Asia, Iran, Syria, Myanmar. And because you have served in Afghanistan, I want to talk about Afghanistan a bit, if you will. What did you make of the emphasis or the remarks made by Lavrov on the way forward in Afghanistan, number one? Number two, what are the prospects in your estimation of a ceasefire and or a transitional government in place in Kabul going forward? And what that might mean for India as well?
I think Lavrov was very realistic when he talked about Afghanistan. We need to see the facts on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
I recall the time in the 1990s when India, Russia and Iran were acting together to prevent the Taliban from really taking over all of Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And there was close coordination and cooperation that impacted on the ground in Afghanistan. I know a little bit about that because I was involved in that. Now, today the scene is totally different. The Russians have close ties, and I'm using this term deliberately,
mm-hmm.
With the Taliban. And so does Iran. For some odd reason, which I don't understand at all, India is refusing to open direct links and open links with the Taliban. Now, the Taliban's ideology is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to endorse it. We don't have to like it. But can we realistically be part of peace processes that we should be without having open ties and open links with all the players in Afghanistan? And the Taliban can't be wished away. So when Lavrov says that one has to approach Afghanistan realistically and that different parties have to be there, have to find a place in whatever settlement takes place, he's correct. In fact, he's not the only one. All countries are saying the same thing. And I'm happy that indirectly, Minister Jaishankar too said the same thing when he said that the interests of everyone within Afghanistan and outside and the countries neighboring Afghanistan have to be harmonized. But in this process,
mm-hmm.
we shouldn't lose out by saying that the Taliban are untouchable. Just because they have close ties with Pakistan, it doesn't mean that you don't talk to them. After all, the acid test of diplomacy is to talk to everyone, to convey your positions directly.
Right.
And they are fundamentalists. We can't wish away the fact that they are fundamentalists. But the international community, including Russia, has drawn certain red lines. And those red lines are fine. I mean, that is something that we need to reiterate to them directly. So, the fact that we have deliberately excluded ourselves by not talking to the Taliban and stubbornly refusing to do so all these years has actually meant that we've vacated a position. And that is why we can't overlook the fact. And I don't think that the Indian foreign policy establishment has liked it. But the fact is that we weren't invited by the Russians recently when they organized a meeting on Afghanistan where the Americans, the Pakistanis, and they themselves and the Chinese, I think, were present.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to approach this with cold realism. Even if we don't like what the Taliban represent, we've got to be coldly realistic about our interests.
Right.
And for some odd reason, we aren't being so.
Indeed. Point taken, Ambassador Kaju. Ambassador Sibal, coming to you now. I want you to gaze into the crystal ball, so to speak, and tell our viewers where you see India-Russia ties going forward, especially the next so-called big idea in the relationship. Now, there's no denying that the relationship is a time-tested one, as you correctly mentioned, and both countries celebrated the 20th anniversary of the annual summits, as well as the 10th anniversary of the special and privileged strategic partnership.
Well, I don't think we should look for that kind of a big idea. I think the challenge actually is to nurture this relationship and not allow it to go off track. Because we are facing a big challenge because of two reasons. One, that our relationship with the United States, and flowing from that, the whole Indo-Pacific concept and Quad and everything is creating some gaps, geopolitical gaps between us and Russia. Number two, Russia has very close strategic ties with China, has a certain dynamic of its own, and affects the internal balance within the Russia-India-China dialogue and BRICS, as well as the SCO, but much more importantly in BRICS and the RIC, where Russia used to be the principal player and now China is the principal player. So we have to keep a foot in the Russian door so that Russia continues to value our relationship and indirectly understands that they need India to balance China, because China has become the senior partner. Number three, that if we allow this relationship to get diluted for any reason, we would have limits placed on our foreign policy choices. And we don't want to be in a position where we lose that kind of strategic autonomy. And for strategic autonomy, we have to maintain our ties with Russia, no matter whether the United States has serious misunderstanding with Russia or not, or Europe has that. We are an independent player, we have independent interests, we have long interests in Russia, we have to preserve them. Energy can be potentially a game changer, it is already becoming one. As Minister Jaishankar said, and rightly, that we have signed contracts, long-term gas contracts. In the Far East, we have potential there, not only for participating in the economic development, but also in terms of gas and oil assets there. In the Arctic, we have certain interests. We have been invited as an observer. We are an observer there. So these are the new dimensions. And the Vladivostok-Chennai corridor, if that can be activated, will have a good impact on Russian thinking, negative thinking about the Indo-Pacific. Then they'll become a part of the Indo-Pacific, because all the trade and this corridor goes through the Indo-Pacific. So these are the areas on which we need to develop better understandings with Russia. And we are on good wicket with Russia. Even if there are some differences here and there, but we have differences with the United States, we have differences with Europe. So we should not attach too much importance to our differences and believe that we should have a relationship with Russia which is free of all problems. That is not being realistic. So we have to manage the problems that there are, in inverted commas, and focus on the positives, which are very many.
Right. And finally, Ambassador Kaju, there was some talk about connectivity as well in terms of the international north-south transport corridor, and also, as Ambassador Sibal mentioned, the Chennai-Vladivostok maritime corridor as well. Also, a possible FTA between India and the Eurasian Economic Union. Your thoughts on where these items might figure in the talks going forward?
I think we've got to nurture connectivity as much as possible. But I would underline that we've got to approach this realistically. The Chennai-Vladivostok maritime corridor must be nurtured very, very carefully and strenuously. As far as the north-south corridor is concerned, with China coming in such a strong way in Iran, I think we will have to monitor developments relating to Chabahar carefully, because even though in recent days and recent weeks the Iranians have been stressing that they remain committed to Chabahar, I, for one, would like to see that Iranian commitment on the ground, because progress on Chabahar, to be candid, has been somewhat fitful, and it now has to be more vigorously pursued. As far as the FTA is concerned, FTAs are inherently very difficult. And I think that there will be no issues regard to explore the possibilities of the FTA, of an FTA, but we've known the fate of trying to arrive at FTAs with our major trading partners in Europe, in the EU, and we know where that process has gone. We know exactly where the RCEP process went. So we've got to approach any FTA talk, as Lavrov suggested, very, very cautiously.
All right, on that note, Ambassador Kaju and Ambassador Sibal, thank you once again for making time for us here at DD India. Appreciate it. All right, time to take stock now of the COVID-19 situation in India. Now, 8 states account for 80% of the new coronavirus infections. That and other updates in our COVID Wrap segment. Take a look.
The second wave of COVID-19 in India is a major cause of concern for all of us. Centre is making all efforts to contain the rising daily new cases. Health Minister Dr. Harshvardhan brainstormed with health ministers of 11 states to take measures and devise future strategies to deal with the increase in daily new cases.
They would assist the state health department and the local district authorities in surveillance, control and containment measures.
Meanwhile, with a view to contain corona cases, the Delhi government has imposed night curfew in the national capital from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. with immediate effect till 30th of April. There will be no restrictions on traffic movement during the night curfew. People can get vaccinated but need to have an e-pass. Owners of ration, fruits, vegetables and medical stores will be allowed on e-pass. Print and electronic media personnel will also be allowed to move on e-pass. Private doctors, nurses and paramedical staff will remain exempted from night curfew. Passengers going to airports, railway stations and bus stations will be exempted if a valid ticket is produced. Pregnant women and patients going for treatment have also been exempted. India's daily new cases stood at 96,982 registered in the last 24 hours. Maharashtra has reported the highest daily new cases at 47,288, while on one hand, Maharashtra has the dubious distinction of having the most cases in the country, but the state has also become the first state in the country to cross the mark of 8 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine being administered.
इसको हमने taken for granted नहीं है. भारत की बहुत सारी जनसंख्या जो है वो ससेप्टेबल है. अभी वायरस यहीं पे है, हमें बच के रहना है और इंडिविजुअल लेवल पे, फैमिली लेवल पे, तंत्र के लेवल पे हमें पूरे वो काम करते रहना चाहिए हैं और चाहिए थे जिससे कि ये वायरस कंट्रोल में रहे.
In a landmark achievement in India's fight against COVID-19, more than 43 lakh vaccination doses were administered in the last 24 hours. This is the highest single-day vaccination coverage in the country so far. The cumulative vaccination coverage has now exceeded 8 crore 31 lakhs.
कोरोना का एकमात्र उपाय ही वैक्सीनेशन है और यदि हम वैक्सीनेशन करवाते हैं तो अपने आप को भी हम सुरक्षित रखते हैं और अपने आसपास को भी हम सुरक्षित रखते हैं.
हमारी सलाह है कि सभी लोग इस वैक्सीन को लगवाएं जिससे कि आने वाले खतरे को टला जा सके.
दोनों डोज लग चुकी हैं और उसके बाद बहुत अच्छा रहा. दोनों डोज लगने के बाद कहीं कोई समस्या नहीं आई.
Madhya Pradesh Chief Minister Shivraj Singh Chauhan launched massive public awareness campaign against coronavirus on Tuesday.
कोरोना संक्रमण को रोकने का व्यवहार चाहिए. अब बाकी काम सरकार करेगी. टेस्टिंग, ट्रेसिंग, टीकाकरण, ट्रीटमेंट, उसमें कसर नहीं छोड़ेंगे.
Although every effort is being made at the government level, but people also have to come forward and give their Jan Bhagidari to defeat corona pandemic. What is needed are 3 basic things: wearing face masks, maintaining social distancing, along with keeping hand and face hygiene. And of course, getting vaccinated when one's turn comes. With Nitendra Singh, Bureau Report, DD India.
And the number of COVID infections rose for the 3rd straight week in the US. And across the Atlantic in the UK, PM Boris Johnson indicated that a planned reopening of the country's economy would take place next week.
COVID-19 cases continue to surge across the world. With the rising number of COVID cases reported in Europe, Greece has decided to extend restrictions on domestic flights until April 12th. whereas restrictions on international flights will remain in place till April 19th. The announcement comes in the wake of surging cases of new COVID-19 variants across the world. As per the restrictions, all those flying to Greece must have a negative RT-PCR test report which they had undergone 72 hours before arrival, and will also have to undergo random testing for COVID-19. Moving to Britain, Prime Minister Boris Johnson indicated that a planned reopening of the economy would take place next week, with the opening of all shops, gyms, hairdressers and outdoor hospitality areas in England. With the vaccine program rolling out rapidly across UK and infection numbers falling, Johnson said England would proceed to stage 2 of his roadmap out of lockdown from April 12th.
And the net result of your efforts, and of course with the vaccine rollout, is that I can today confirm that from Monday the 12th of April we will move to step 2 of our roadmap, reopening shops, gyms, zoos, holiday campsites, personal care services like hairdressers, and of course beer gardens and outdoor hospitality of all kinds.
Meanwhile, with the number of COVID-19 cases rising for the third straight week with increased hospitalization in the United States, Secretary of State Antony Blinken said top US priority was to fight COVID-19 at home, but that the goal would be achieved soon, pointing to President Joe Biden's promise that 90% of Americans will be near a vaccination site by April 19th.
The world has to come together. As we get more confident in our vaccine supply here at home, we are exploring options to share more with other countries going forward. We believe that we'll be in a position to do much more on this front. I know that many countries are asking for the United States to do more, some with growing desperation because of the scope and scale of their COVID emergencies. We hear you, and I promise we're moving as fast as possible.
In Germany, according to Health Minister Jens Spahn, the country will have immunized 20% of its population against the novel coronavirus by the beginning of May. Germany has seen a rise in infections as it lags behind Britain, Israel and the United States in the pace of vaccination. The number of confirmed coronavirus cases in Germany increased by 8,497 to over 28 lakh. The reported death toll rose by 50 to more than 77,000. Meanwhile, in Portugal, cafe and eating joints reopened with a maximum of 4 people allowed to sit together as the southern European country continues to ease more of its pandemic lockdown restrictions. Bureau Report, DD India.
Right, moving on to the other story we are tracking here on Newsnight. Polling was held in the 4 states of West Bengal, Assam, Kerala and Tamil Nadu beside the Union Territory of Puducherry. It was the third of 8 phases of polling in West Bengal. Assam, on the other hand, saw the third and last phase of polling. The next report has more.
Voting took place in 475 assembly seats across 4 states and 1 union territory amidst the pandemic, adhering to COVID-19 safety protocol to elect new governments. People across these states were seen queuing in line to exercise their franchise. Barring sporadic incidents of violence, polling was by and large peaceful. In West Bengal, people voted in 31 seats in the third phase. Seats in Hooghly, South 24 Parganas and Howrah districts went to the polls in this phase. The state has 5 more rounds of polling left to go for the 294-member assembly. BJP and TMC accused each other of attacks on their workers.
One incident happened in Khanakulesi, যেখানে একজন ক্যান্ডিডেট 222, 223, 224, 225 পোলিং স্টেশনে গিয়েছিলেন। ওখানে দুটো গ্রুপের মধ্যে অল্টারকেশন হয়েছিল। ওই ইনসিডেন্টে 4 জনকে অ্যারেস্ট করা হয়েছে। Another incident happened in Arambagh where a candidate had gone to Arandi Mohalla. ওখানে দুটো গ্রুপের মধ্যে অল্টারকেশন হয়েছিল and ওই ইনসিডেন্টে দুটো গ্রুপের থেকে 5 জনকে অ্যারেস্ট করা হয়েছে।
In the meantime, Election Commission has suspended a polling officer in Uluberia Uttar in West Bengal's Howrah district after spare electronic voting machines and voter verifiable paper audit trail machines were allegedly found at a political leader's house.
चुनाव आयोग ने तुरंत कुछ कार्रवाई की है कि वो मशीन यूज नहीं करेंगे और वो संबंधित अधिकारी को सस्पेंड किया है, लेकिन इससे भी ज्यादा इसकी जांच होने की जरूरत है। तो हमारी मांग है कि इलेक्शन कमीशन खुद डिटेल में इसकी जांच करे और आवश्यक कड़ी कार्रवाई करे, क्योंकि ये साधारण अपराध नहीं है, ये चुनाव प्रक्रिया के साथ एक तरह से धांधली का व्यवहार है और इसलिए इसकी अलग जांच होनी चाहिए।
In Assam, polling was conducted in 40 out of the 126 seats in the third and final phase. Over 7.9 million voters were eligible to cast their franchise in 11,401 polling stations to decide the fate of 337 candidates.
नौकरी मिल जाए, अगर सरकार देगा तो वही नौकरी मिल जाए, अच्छा उन्नति हो देश का, वही।
Down south, Kerala witnessed a fierce fight between the ruling Left Democratic Front and Congress-led United Democratic Front. Voting took place in one go in 140 seats in the state. 957 candidates are in the fray, whose fate sealed in the EVMs. Counting of votes will take place on 2nd May. In neighbouring Tamil Nadu, voters exercised their franchise in all the 234 seats in single phase. The DMK-led alliance is looking to unseat the AIA-DMK government after being out of power for 10 years. Polling conducted peacefully, barring sporadic incidents of violence. Voting was also held for the 30-member Union Territory of Puducherry Assembly. A total of 324 candidates are in the fray. The Union Territory slipped into a political crisis shortly before the elections were announced, when the Congress-led government fell due to defections. Bureau Report, DD India.
And amid the third phase of polling in West Bengal, Prime Minister Modi campaigned for the BJP in North Bengal's Cooch Behar, slamming West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee for an appeal to Muslim population not to divide their vote. PM Modi said it indicates that she has lost popular support.
अभी हाल ही में आपने कहा कि सभी मुसलमान एक हो जाओ, वोट बंटने मत दो। दीदी, आप ये कह रही है, इसका मतलब है कि आपको यकीन हो गया है कि मुस्लिम वोट बैंक की आपकी जो ताकत आप मानती थी, वो मुस्लिम वोट बैंक भी आपके हाथ से निकल गया है। मुस्लिम भी आपसे दूर हो गए हैं। आपको पब्लिकली ऐसा कहना पड़ रहा है, इसी से पता चलता है कि आप इलेक्शन हार गई है।
And PM Modi said a similar appeal to the Hindus from the BJP would have drawn the wrath of the Election Commission and media alike.
अगर हमने कहा होता कि सारे हिंदू एकजुट हो जाओ, बीजेपी को वोट दो, तो दीदी ये इलेक्शन कमीशन हमें 8-10 नोटिस भेज देता। प्रधानमंत्री को भी नोटिस आती, अध्यक्ष को भी आती, उम्मीदवार को भी आती। अरे इतना ही नहीं, सारे अखबार देश के पहले पेज पर भरे पड़े होते और दुनिया भर के एडिटोरियल लिख करके हमारे बॉल नोच लिए होते।
And Mamata Banerjee also addressed several rallies in West Bengal. At a rally in Chanditola, Mamata Banerjee urged Muslim voters not to waste their vote on the AIMIM. She called on them to vote for her party, the TMC. At another rally in Alipurdwar, she gave an account of her government's achievements in the education sector. Listen in.
सुबह सुबह वोट दीजिए, जोड़ा पुल निशान को वोट दीजिए। जोड़ा पुल कैसा है? माँ बहन जैसा है। जोड़ा पुल कैसा है? भाई बहन जैसा है। जोड़ा पुल कैसा है? हिंदू मुस्लिम जैसा है। जोड़ा पुल कैसा है? तराई गोरखा जैसा है। जोड़ा पुल कैसा है? राखी बंधन जैसा है। जोड़ा पुल कैसे है? संप्रीति जैसा है। जोड़ा पुल कैसे है? एक साथ में रहने का नाता है। इसी के लिए हम शांति से रहने चाहूंगी। चाय बागान खुलने के लिए, चाय सुंदरी प्रोग्राम बनाने के लिए, आप लोग को घर बनाने के लिए, आप लोग को इंग्लिश मीडियम स्कूल चालू करने के लिए, आपको सदरी भाषा में चालू करने के लिए, आपको हिंदी भाषा में चालू करने के लिए, आपको नेपाली भाषा भी हम चालू कर दिया, राजवंशी भी चालू कर दिया, बहुत सारे भाषा हम चालू कर दिया, कुरुक भाषा भी आपको कहते हैं। आप तृणमूल कांग्रेस के वोट दो।
The BJP celebrated its 41st Foundation Day on Tuesday. Prime Minister Modi addressed party cadres on the occasion. He cautioned BJP workers against attempts by the opposition to spin false narratives and stoke imaginary fears to create political instability in the country. He said that BJP has been winning elections because of its focus on implementing the promises it made to the people. My colleague Bikramjit Singh has more.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed party leaders and workers via video conference on the 41st Foundation Day of the BJP. He paid tributes to the founding fathers in the Jan Sangh as well as the BJP workers devoted to the service of the nation. PM Narendra Modi said it is because of the efforts of party workers or Karyakartas that the BJP today is the world's largest party. Prime Minister reiterated the basic ideology of the party and said that political parties donning the garb of pseudo-secularism stand exposed.
ऐसी पार्टियों ने जो नकली सेकुलरिज्म का नकाब पहन रखा था, वो भी उतरना शुरू हो गया है। सेकुलरिज्म का हमारे यहाँ मतलब बना दिया गया है कि कुछ ही लोगों के लिए योजनाएं, कुछ ही लोगों के लिए फेवर, वोट बैंक के हिसाब से नीतियां।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi told his partymen to create awareness among the people about the welfare schemes run by the central government and combat false narratives being spun by opponents on issues like the farm laws and the Citizenship Amendment Act.
आज गलत नैरेटिव बनाए जाते हैं, कभी सीए को लेकर, कभी कृषि कानूनों को लेकर, कभी लेबर लॉ को लेकर। बीजेपी के प्रत्येक कार्यकर्ता को समझना होगा कि इसके पीछे सोची समझी राजनीति है। ये एक बहुत बड़ा षड्यंत्र है।
The Prime Minister also hit out at those who had often dubbed the BJP as an election-winning machine over its poll triumphs and accused them of double standards, saying rival parties and their leaders were lauded when they won.
जो लोग कहते हैं कि बीजेपी चुनाव जीतने की मशीन है, वो एक प्रकार से भारत के लोकतंत्र की जो परिपक्वता है, उसको समझ ही नहीं पाते। सच्चाई ये है कि बीजेपी चुनाव जीतने की मशीन नहीं, देश और देशवासियों का दिल जीतने वाला एक अविरल, अनवरत अभियान है।
On the occasion, BJP President JP Nadda said that today, under the leadership of PM Narendra Modi, India has established itself as a global leader.
प्रधानमंत्री जी के नेतृत्व में एक गौरवशाली भारत आगे बढ़ रहा है, एक गौरव के साथ भारत बढ़ रहा है, दुनिया में अपना नाम स्थापित कर रहा है।
On the occasion of Foundation Day of the BJP, JP Nadda paid tributes to the party's founders, Dr. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee and Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay at the party headquarters. BJP is today the largest party in the world, putting service to the nation before all else. With inputs from Bikramjit Singh, Bureau Report, DD India.
Now moving on, U.S. climate envoy John Kerry on Tuesday met Environment Minister Prakash Javadekar and discussed about climate finance, joint research and collaboration, among other issues. Now, U.S. President Joe Biden will host a virtual leaders summit on climate on 22nd and 23rd April. Now, 40 world leaders, including Prime Minister Narendra Modi, have been invited for the summit. And in a tweet, Minister Javadekar said, I quote, had an engaging and fruitful discussion with Mr. John Kerry, Special Presidential Envoy for Climate. We discussed a range of issues, including climate finance, joint research and collaboration, etc. Unquote. Kerry also met Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in New Delhi. And Kerry on Tuesday praised India as a world leader in renewable energy. He hailed India's leadership, which has been critical on a range of issues, including delivering COVID vaccines to the entire world. He said decisive action by India in partnership with the rest of the world in committing to clean energy goals will determine what this transformation will mean for generations to come. Kerry added that the US is India's friend and partner that's around to support India through its path of a sustainable future. Kerry appreciated PM Modi's government's target of reaching 450 gigawatt of renewables by the year 2030.
The climate crisis is an existential threat, certainly for large numbers of people, if not for the whole planet. India is today undergoing a remarkable transformation, lifting millions out of poverty. And it's a major player on the global stage. And decisive action from India now, in partnership with the rest of the world, will determine what this transformation will mean for all generations to come. India has the opportunity to both elevate women's empowerment and to avoid the mistakes made by other countries like ours, mistakes that result, instead of building a modern and sustainable society that is the envy of the world, some of us have contributed too much to the problem that we're living through today. To transform our economy in a way that prevents the impending climate crisis by keeping global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius. India's global leadership has been critical across a range of issues, including on delivering COVID vaccines to the world. But I am particularly grateful that India is getting the job done on climate, pushing the curve. You are indisputably a world leader already in the deployment of renewable energy, and your leadership of the International Solar Alliance promises to advance clean energy across India and other dynamic growing economies around the world. Prime Minister Modi's announcement of a target of 450 gigawatts of renewables by 2030 sets a very strong example for how to power a growing economy with clean energy.
In other news, Israel's President Reuven Rivlin has announced his decision to mandate Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to form a new government after an inconclusive election. The move gives Netanyahu a new lease of political life. Israel's longest-serving leader in power consecutively since 2009 now faces the tough task of breaking an unprecedented political stalemate and enlisting enough allies for a governing coalition. Netanyahu will have 28 days to do so, with a possibility of a 2-week extension before President Rivlin picks another candidate or asks Parliament to choose one. Israel's election on 23rd March, its fourth in 2 years, ended with neither a Netanyahu-led right-wing and religious bloc nor a prospective alliance of his opponents winning a parliamentary majority. But in consultations Rivlin held with political parties on Monday on granting the coalition-building mandate, Netanyahu received more endorsements than his challengers, leading to the president's televised announcement giving him the nod.
Given this state of things, where there is no majority of 61 Knesset members supporting a specific candidate, and in the absence of other considerations indicating the chances of any of the candidates to form a government, I have come to my decision according to the map of recommendations, which indicates that Knesset member Benjamin Netanyahu has a slightly higher chance of forming a government. Accordingly, I have decided to entrust him with the task of forming a government. This is not an easy decision to me morally and ethically.
Iran and the United States held indirect talks in Vienna as part of broader negotiations to revive the 2015 nuclear deal between Tehran and global powers. Tehran ruled out face-to-face bilateral talks. The indirect talks are aimed at both sides resuming compliance with the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, but neither side foresees any early breakthrough.
Our goal is, of course, to see to it that that breakout time is as long as possible. Our overarching goal is to ensure that Iran's nuclear program is permanently and verifiably constrained, and that on a permanent and verifiable basis, Iran will not be able to obtain a nuclear weapon. That is not just our goal. That is the goal of our remaining partners in the P5+1. It is the goal of our partners and allies in the region, and it's certainly a goal that has broad support within Congress as well. So we are not seeking to drag these talks on any longer than necessary, but we're also not going to cut corners, given the profound stakes that are at play here.
And the family of Britain's Captain Tom Moore, the World War II veteran who lifted a nation's spirits during the pandemic, are calling for people to come together and raise funds for charity on what would have been his 101st birthday. His death in February drew condolences from Queen Elizabeth, Prime Minister Boris Johnson and US President Joe Biden, among others. The news was reported across Europe, the US, Asia and beyond.
Last year, Captain Tom inspired us all
and filled the world with hope. From the 30th of April to the 3rd of May, Captain Tom's legacy will shine bright.
So whatever you can do, do it 100 times and help raise money for charity.
5! 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
21, 22, 23. 39.
42 miles! 53, 54.
This is not easy.
33, 34,
85,
86,
88,
96,
97,
98,
99,
100! Now it's your turn. Dream up your 100 challenge.
Fundraise or donate to a charity of your choice.
And post your 100 with the hashtag CaptainTom100.
So together we can continue what my father started.
Make sure tomorrow will be a good day.
Taking inspiration from Army veteran Captain Sir Tom Moore. A much-loved Corona warrior, Sir Moore raised almost £33 million for the NHS charities by walking 100 laps of his Bedfordshire garden before he turned 100. His family is now encouraging people to take on their own 100 challenge on what would have been his 101st birthday weekend.
This is about whoever you are, whatever circumstance you're in, invent your challenge around the number 100. His inspiration, I think, goes way beyond us as a family.
Captain Sir Tom, whose fundraising walk in his garden in Marston Moreton captured the hearts of the nation last year, died with coronavirus at the Bedford Hospital. And his family, as well as people from all walks of life, are determined to keep his legacy of charity alive. Bureau Report, DD India.
And finally, the 25-day Dandi March from Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad ended earlier in the day. Vice President Venkaiah Naidu attended the closing ceremony as a chief guest. My colleague Didaj Kumar has more.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi flagged off the 25-day-long Dandi march from Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad on 12th March 2021. The march was completed on April 6th in Dandi. Vice President Venkaiah Naidu attended the closing ceremony as the chief guest. He began the day paying homage to Father of the Nation, Mahatma Gandhi, at Prarthana Mandir in Dandi. He then visited the National Salt Satyagraha Memorial, where Mahatma Gandhi broke the salt law made by the British by taking a fistful of salt. He penned his thoughts in the visitor's book at the National Salt Satyagraha Memorial. Vice President also interacted with the volunteers who participated in the Padyatra from Sabarmati to Dandi. Union Minister Prahlad Patel was also present with the Vice President at the closing ceremony. On this occasion, the Vice President called the march as historic.
नमक जैसी सामान्य लेकिन रोजमर्रा के लिए जरूरी चीजों को अपना सत्याग्रह का उद्देश्य बनाया। बहनों और भाइयों, महाभारत में उक्ति है, महाजनो येन गतः सपंता, अर्थात जो पद महापुरुषों द्वारा दिखाए गए हो उसी पर चलना चाहिए। गांधी जी का दंड यात्रा राष्ट्र के जीवन में ऐसी है अनुकरणीय पथ है जो सच्चाई, अच्छाई और भलाई के लिए प्रकाश से प्रकाशित है। विगत 75 वर्षों में राष्ट्र महात्मा जी के द्वारा दिखाई गई सबका साथ, सबका विकास और सबका विश्वास मार्ग पर ही चला है।
Apart from the freedom movement, Gandhiji's journey envisaged the adoption of cleanliness, emphasized on a drug-free India and use of Swadeshi products. Union Minister of Culture Prahlad Singh Patel reiterated that 91 years ago, Mahatma Gandhi started the freedom movement in the form of Dandi Yatra, and once again, the journey has been relived. This also marks the beginning of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav ahead of the 75th anniversary of independence.
91 वर्ष पूर्व महात्मा गांधी जी ने देश के स्वावलंबन और स्वाभिमान के जागरण के लिए जो यात्रा प्रारंभ की थी, 91 वर्ष बाद उस यात्रा का पुनर्जागरण का अभियान 12 मार्च से शुरू हुआ था। मैं इस यात्रा का समापन नहीं मानता, बल्कि अमृत महोत्सव के इस अभियान की शुरुआत मानता हूं, जिसमें पदयात्रियों ने एक बेमिसाल अपना सहयोग प्रदान किया है।
The Chief Minister of Sikkim, Prem Singh Tamang, also participated in the Yatra and called himself lucky for being able to participate in this historic Padyatra. He also paid tribute to the priest of non-violence and remembered his contribution. With inputs from Dheeraj Kumar, Bureau Report, DD India.
And with that, it's a wrap. But news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Don't forget, it's a simple task. Just wear a mask. Join DD India's Mask Up campaign to beat COVID-19. You can see the logo in the top left-hand corner of your screen. Remember, wear a mask, wash your hands and practice physical distancing. Now is not the time to be adventurous. Now's the time to be abundantly cautious. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.